What's up, everyone? I'm Jack Fossett, and today I'm trying out ToneX 1. Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Welcome to this demo and review of the ToneX 1 from IK Multimedia. Now, those of you that follow me, this is pretty out of my wheelhouse. I'm not into a lot of digital modeling when it comes to performance and also a lot of what I do on my channel. So this is kind of, I don't want to say new territory for me because I have done modeling before, and I actually use digital modeling quite a bit in recording. To me, that's one of the greatest arenas, so to speak, of digital modeling, is because it's so easy to record with, to get different tones, textures, effects that you might want, where you don't need to constantly switch between pedal boards and amplifiers. And also, many of us are limited more so for home recording than we are for gigging purposes. It's like if you want a crank damp sound, that might actually be harder to do in a home studio or even in a lot of recording studios that are, I've been in plenty of recording studios that are in cities and, in places where, cranking a Marshall Plexi like you might picture you want to do in a studio, it just doesn't really happen in real life. It tends to be smaller amplifiers. And so all that being said, I use digital modeling a lot for that, and I'm fairly comfortable with it in that respect. Now, what this is a really cool idea of being able to save presets and use them on the fly in such a small package. One of the cool things with this is they've recently released a whole series of Dumble amplifier models. Now, they came out with a unique one that was kind of more of like an orangey color that was specific for that one. This is a standard one. However, I do have the Dumble models loaded on this, and so that's primarily what you're hearing, although I am going to be playing a few different other amp models. Now, I mostly want to talk about the tone, all right? Please don't come here looking for a tutorial on how this works. I will link to some other videos. There are some great videos on there on how to dial through all the different things that this can do, because it actually can do a lot, even though it's fairly small. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I want you to focus on this review. Focus on this review from someone who's not good with these devices. Okay, so view everything through that lens. I'm actually very comfortable with digital modelers. I'm not really particularly good with complex devices. I'm an old millennial. You remember the watches with the different buttons, and it's like, you hold this one and tap this one twice and I could never figure out any of those. So, and yeah, sure, you can laugh about that and be like, yeah, well, I could figure this stuff out easy. Fine. There are lots of people who can figure that stuff out, but there are also a lot of people like me out there who have a hard time figuring that kind of stuff out. So I want you to view everything through the lens. We're going to start talking about the tone. Now, before we get any further, let's listen to a little bit more. The biggest benefit that I found of the IK multimedia in general is that the tone is really good. The tone of the modelers has the touch responsiveness that you want. It has loads of amp models available that you can load into this, and you know, of course, also in their other software and things. There's even some, you know, like there's Blues Junior and Fender Blues Deluxe models that I think probably sound better than the real thing. And again, I also go back to that whole, you know, they could get the samples of these and record these at their optimal Premiere settings, which a lot of times you might not be able to do on your own. So, you know, that actually kind of stands to reason. Like you could get the sound of a Blues Junior in its perfect sweet spot at any volume you want without needing to deal with the unruly amp on its own, right? So, and of course, you know, when you're talking about Dumbles, like to be able to get a real very authentic Dumble sound and a multitude of Dumble sounds from a multitude of their amplifiers and have it actually be able to load into a pedal, that's really beneficial, you know, and that's a sound that many of us are in fact familiar with. They've been used on so many records that we all know and love that it's not a foreign sound, even though it is a very foreign amplifier. You know, a lot of us don't have $100,000 to kick around on an amplifier, or even, you know, many of the clones of Dumble amplifiers, you know, whether you're talking about Two Rock or Amplified Nation or whatever one's out there, a lot of those are in the, you know, $4,000 plus range. So it's an inaccessible tone, even though it's one that we all know and love. So to, again, have it loadable in this, I think is very, very useful. Now, this one in particular, there's pros and cons about the way that they went about this. And part of this is me just kind of describing the nature of what it is. I think the real nature, again, of what this is something that you're going to want to tweak as little as possible. Look at that just, again, very objectively. I think that was the point of this pedal. I think the point was to be able to load these amp models and basically, again, have a few snapshots that you can cycle through very easily, but not necessarily if you want to dive in and go nuts with it. Of course, that's what you might get the bigger ToneX pedal for instead of the ToneX one. Now, I will say that this one has very, very easy tweakability of its basic settings using the knobs that are on it. So in its basic mode here, with the dual mode, you've got, this is your volume, you've got bass, middle, and treble, right? You press the alternate button, they all start blinking, and then they switch. Now this is gain, this is your noise gate, your compression, and your reverb. Those were all very, very easy to change on the fly, and I thought that was really good, in particular because if you've ever used digital modelers live, particularly into a PA, one of the things you might know is that the tone can vary drastically from, when you set it up on your computer and you're listening through studio monitors to then you go out to a PA in like a real life situation. The bass could be super boomy, the treble could be super ice picky. What might have sounded great on your computer does not sound good live. So that allows you very, very easily to just kind of dial it in the way that you want it, and it saves the presets automatically so you don't need to change it again later. So I thought that was really good. Beyond that, diving in, I did find it much more complex. If you really wanted to get into the multiple other functionality of this pedal, that was when it started to lose me a little bit. Like I said, view this objectively. Aging millennial device that's intended to be simple and give you some really basic functionality. Now, there are other things that you can do. There are foot switches that can give you more options as far as, kind of flipping on and off effects and things. But again, what I think the smartest use of this would be to set up a couple of presets, even if it's the same amp. Maybe it's like you have one kind of edge of breakup, and then the next preset is boosted with a bit more gain, and your delay on, right? There's your solo tone. And then you can set it up with other pedals and things to fill that out. Again, going back to the main point, the thing that really, really pleased me was that the amp tones were so good, and the effect tones were great too. And of course, even though we're mostly focusing on the Dumble models in this video, I do want to play some of the other tones as well, including there are a number of really fantastic Fender Tweed tones. And again, great tone that you just can't get in real life. I have a Fender Bassman, and I never get to crank that. I don't care I've played it on big stages before, and I've never turned up past 4 because people don't want big, massive amplifiers just pounding volume anymore. It's just, unless you're in a huge touring band playing massive venues, in a lot of real life context, that just doesn't happen. So this gives you the opportunity to get very realistic sounds, directly from the source that are convincing. Now, the people at IK Multimedia, they did sponsor this video. They were great to work with. Really nice people. And one of the things that I like too is you can tell that they care about what they do. This is a company that really takes it seriously. In that regard, they kind of reminded me of like Strymon with the amount of dedication they put into research, to studying, to producing this. These are made in Italy, which I think is really cool. It's not like it's a cheaply made product. This is something that they really clearly put a lot into. And I thought the addition of the Dumbles was really cool. The number of other amps I thought was just astonishing. Again, it's like they had Laney VC30. I love the Laney VC30. It's a very underappreciated amplifier and wasn't even around for the longest amount of time. And there's obviously there's Marshalls and Mesa Boogies and you name it, and they really seem to capture the right vibe of all of these, and that's that takes a lot of time and dedication to get all that together. So I think for the library in and of itself, this is kind of worth it. I think it's worth it in terms of its studio capabilities. This can be used as an interface, or it could also just be used if you have, an interface that you like and, you're not into tweaking things after the fact. One of the things you could do is load some cool presets on this and then record directly into your DAW, and your creativity is really the limit as far as the amount of things that you can do with something like this in a home setting. Again, as far as it being on a pedal board, be great to set it on a pedal board and just go direct in and have a couple of different amp tones from a massively expensive amp that you could never run at the sweet spot anyway and get that tone live. But it all goes back to the tone. It all goes back to the fact that I think they did a really great job of capturing some of these tones. Now, I promise I'm not going to say something like game changer, because I don't want to overly sensationalize something. I think that if you're someone who's not into modelers, if this one wouldn't convince you, I don't think you'd get into modelers in general anyway. I do think that it all comes back to the tone. Like I said, when I record at home, I frequently use digital modeling because in a recorded context, I think it sounds really good. Live, I tend to still prefer tube amps, and part of that is because I like the physicality and the simplicity of it. I like having a box that's actually pushing air at me. One middle ground for that, if you're kind of on the fence about it, is there are also, quite a few powered cabs out there nowadays that something like this would work with. You can turn the cab off on this, so you can just use the amp preamp. You could then go into powered cabinet, or there's the FR options, and then you could keep the cab simulation on. You can also just experiment. Sometimes having the cab on going into a powered cab just sounds good anyway. There's no rule if it sounds good. It's kind of the way that I look at this. So I'm going to link below to where you can check this out. That is an affiliate link. If you shop through that link, that gets me some commission at no extra cost to you. Please let us know in the comments, what do you think of this? Is this something that you'd be into? Is this something that you see building an entire rig around? Or, another thing, and this is kind of a B-side value, I want to say. Something like this is also super beneficial to have to take with you if you are a tube amp person and your amp goes down. I always hate it when tube amp people are like, oh, you got to bring some extra tubes with you to a gig. I'm like, no. Like, first of all, half of my tube amps have big pack plates on them, and I'm not going to bring, a power drill and fiddle around and try and figure out what tube has gone bad, and then get out the oven mitt to take the hot burning. I just don't have any interest in doing any of that. One of the smartest things you can do if you're playing live is to have a backup that can be immediately subbed in as quick as possible if something goes wrong. And things have gone wrong for me. I've had times where I've had amps blow on stage and all kinds of things. What you need to be able to do is to, as seamlessly as possible, switch to something else and let the show keep going. There's nothing worse than kind of fiddling with something and having the whole flow of everything run. So if you have something like this, even if you're a tube amp person, okay, your amp goes down, plug this in immediately and you keep playing. So that's a huge benefit of it as well, even if that might not be its kind of like primary function. Thanks again for watching. I'm Jack Fossett. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next time.